It is without question the most extraordinary white-collar crime of all time. Banks have been entered over weekends thousands of times. Con men, criminals have tried all kinds of schemes. There's hardly anything new, really. But this was extraordinary, novel, and remarkably successful. Nobody had ever done it before, and because it had happened once, it could not be done again.
He wanted to be rich.
Those two great colonizers, Portugal and Britain, have maintained their close friendship over the years. It's more than just the port. This is a tale of an upstart called Arthur Virgil Alves Reis, a nonentity who wanted to be with the big boys, a fantasist whose ambitions stretched beyond mere ownership of very large chunks of money. He wanted to possess the very banks themselves. He would own banks, but to get there, he would need the cooperation of a very English gentleman, a man he would ultimately drag down into the quagmire of his wild dreams.
So, let's start. We are in the 20s in Portugal. Portugal was, in a way, in some kind of depression.
Dr. Francisco Mota is a newspaper lawyer in Lisbon. He grew up around the corner from the British Institute, a large, ornate mansion. As a boy, he was often told stories, legends of the previous owner of that stately pile, a certain Alves Reis, a very wealthy man. He became fascinated in the story, and using his lawyerly skills, he dug through hundreds of documents, contracts and court papers. Portugal, for most of the 20s, was a democratic republic, but with democracy comes opportunity.
And it was a time of great chances. For instance, in those years, I don't know, 3-4 years, there were 10 or 15 new banks. It was a time that if you were smart, you tried to cash on something, you tried to find out your place to make lots of money quickly.
Good for speculators.
Yes, good for speculators. That's the point. It was a time that richness would appear suddenly without knowing how. People spending lots of money. People were not rich the day before.
The other world authority on the Reis case is Murray Tay Bloom. He made his fortune in non-fiction journalism when it boomed in the 40s. His book, The Man Who Stole Portugal, is required reading by trainees at central banks around the world. When researching the book, he met sons, mistresses and bird dogs. More later. He's now in his 80s. In his office, lined with books on counterfeiting, cons and scams, I asked him about the Reis family.
They had some claims to glory in a family. His father was a distant cousin of a famous Portuguese admiral. So it was essentially a middle-class family. He was about 5'6", a little pudgy. He certainly didn't have the glowing appeal of a really expert con man. He wasn't that loquacious, and it was fairly ordinary in many ways, except for his imagination, which was extraordinary.
Ordinary he looks. Just look at, this is a man in the street.
Yes.
Nothing special.
Nothing.
After undistinguished beginnings, Reis headed out to the vast Portuguese colony of Angola to make his fortune. At that time, Angola was the land of opportunity. Luckily for us, Reis, something of an egoist, wrote several ornate autobiographies. You'll notice he has that annoying habit of referring to countries as black lovers and himself in the third person.
He alone imagined the dream of a prosperous and great Angola, not to lose the black lover that made him drunk. He had to be, in the eyes of the world, a perfect gentleman.
The only problem was Reis was a 20-year-old nobody. He needed qualifications, but couldn't be bothered acquiring them the usual way. That's where some high-quality paper and his trusty Remington typewriter came in. Dr. Mota showed me a copy of Reis's impressive diploma from the University of Oxford.
We, members of the Superior Council of the University of Oxford, make known that Arthur Virgílio Alves Reis, the grade of bachelor, for his application in the disciplines. Engineering, science, geology, geometry, physics, metallurgy, pure mathematics, paleography, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, applied mathematics, chemistry, experimental physics, mechanisms, and applied mechanics, applied physics, general civil engineering, civil and mechanical engineering, general engineering, mechanical design. We have passed this diploma, which we signed.
D.W. Spooner. This is marvelous because anybody who fools around with English knows that a spoonerism is a great joy. It's customary to cuss the bride kind of thing. A little touch of genius to have prepared to go to Angola with that. How many people in Angola had ever seen an Oxford diploma, so it was accepted and it was passed.
In the start of his career, all the basis of his qualifications are completely spurious.
Yes.
But he is a clever man.
He's a very clever man. I think he's completely unscrupulous. He has no scruples at all.
No moral scruples.
No moral scruples at all, completely.
He's a little man, isn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, physically he's not.
Yes, he's a little man. He's not an attractive guy. Quite serious. Humor, no. And it was a very family guy.
He began dabbling in business and soon came unstuck, bouncing dud checks like flat pebbles across the Atlantic. He had a demanding wife and not a scud in the bank. Creditors were closing in and were after his jugular.
And it suddenly struck him just the lack of a lot of paper was going to force him into shame and bankruptcy. What were banknotes? Just printed piece of paper. And once his thoughts started in that direction, they eventually came to a certain conclusion.
For curiosity, I organized a dossier on the Bank of Portugal. At the stamping workshop, there was only a kind of laundry that washed and pressed the banknotes, and after cleaning them, they would be collected. In everything, I did not find a single word about the section of control of banknotes, and I concluded that if there was no control, I should not be afraid to make an issue of my own. How would I order a secret issue? It would be madness to have the work done in Portugal. The reproduction of the plates could be done with great perfection because we have good engravers, but the special type of paper with its own characteristics and watermarks could only be obtained abroad. On the bottom of the Vasco da Gama note, I saw that Waterloo and Sons had printed it.
But of course, there'd be expenses here, and he was strapped. He didn't have any money. He had met Jose, who was a younger brother of the Portuguese ambassador to the Netherlands, kind of a ne'er-do-well. And through Jose, he had met a Dutch exporter named Meringue, who had gotten rich selling stuff to Germany during World War I. And through Meringue, a German named Hennies, who had been in the German Secret Service during World War I. It was a curious international gathering.
Meringue is a small or middle merchant. He had lots of companies. They were all himself. He had lots of names, lots of printed papers, stationery, lots of things, but it was himself. But he was, let's say, he would look like a respectful person.
It would be the team approach. Meringue, the only one who was remotely respectable, would be the front man. Hennies, the German, knew about contracts and had already made money selling forged postage stamps. Jose, well, he was a bit of an idiot, but he did have a useful brother, Antonio, who was the Portuguese ambassador to The Hague.
This is a very important connection, because an important person. He was a guy who had some kind of special position. He was not a civil servant. And he had a small vice. He liked to play games, cards.
Card game. Oh, gambler.
He was a gambler. He was a gambler, and he had some debts. So this was a very good soil.
The ambassador would write letters of introduction for Meringue to, for instance, banknote printers. He could also provide diplomatic immunity for transporting heavy suitcases back into Portugal. Reis was playing a tricky game. He lied to his accomplices, telling them a story of a complex deal involving corrupt friends of his who were inside the Bank of Portugal. It was a deal that wasn't exactly illegal.
I never dreamed of having Meringue or Hennis or Bandeira or anyone else become my accomplice. A secret is only a secret when it is one man's secret. No, the only way to win them over would be for me to pretend to be acting on higher orders, those of the Banco de Portugal itself.
They would, in effect, be getting the right to print Portuguese scud banknotes for use only in Angola. These would be overstamped in big blue letters, Angola. The key point was it was up to them to do this overprinting, and, well, they might just forget.
Once they realized nobody's going to be watching them, and if they didn't stamp Angola on it, they had perfectly acceptable Portuguese currency. The cost of making these banknotes with a private banknote maker, a few $1,000s only. So in effect, you can convert, say, $7,000 or $8,000 into $1 million. That was a marvelous deal. The Portuguese call it a China deal because they had made their best deals in China.
All they needed was the contract from the Bank of Portugal, giving them the right to print the money.
That night, I went to Alves dos Reis Limitada, and having only God as my witness, I slowly typed 2 pages of one entire sheet of sealed paper. I took the sheet off the typewriter and signed on the 5th line of the same page. On the following morning, November 25th, 1924, I quietly went into the office of the notary with my friend.
You get it notarized by your local notary. He validates that indeed this is your signature.
After lunch, I went to the British consulate and legalized the notary's signature.
You take it to the consulates of the various countries, and then with all these seals and notarization, look very authentic.
Well, what's this contract actually say? You're a lawyer, and
No one knows. I'll tell you. Alves Reis, he says in his book, if you write a contract that talks about millions, people will be so impressed by the money, they will be suggest not to look at details. They get smashed by the contract. He says that because the contract it's so difficult to understand. Because
is that the language of it?
People, at a certain moment, when they are reading it, they stop questioning themselves. They are just impressed. And they forged the signature of the governor.
How did he forge the signature?
Well, he had this kind of ampliation from the banknotes.
He just took a Portuguese banknote
and copied it? And yes, exactly.
And it's outrageous.
Outrageous.
The greatest art forgers must also be experts at faking the provenance for their paintings. They have to have come from somewhere. So it is with con men. Meringue, the front man, went to the Dutch banknote printer Enschede with the impressive contract. Enschede didn't do Portuguese notes, but they knew a firm that did, Waterloo's of London. They had Vasco da Gama 500 scud plates in their vault. Meringue implied Enschede would get a juicy commission for the deal, and they wrote him a letter of introduction to Sir William Waterloo. Meringue was delighted. He now had a provenance. He was getting more authentic by the day. Next stop, London and Waterloo's.
He was Sir William Waterloo. He got the knighthood for services to the crown unmentioned for essentially helping counterfeit German imperial banknotes in World War I. He was upright. He was 6'2", impressive. Not the smartest man in the world, but he fancied himself, didn't suffer fools gladly.
In looking at that, from your point of view, would you be taken in by it?
Of course.
You wouldn't be surprised that Waterloo was also impressed.
Yes, I was not at all surprised. Although he had his lawyers to study the contract.
Why didn't they spot it?
Well, I don't know.
He said yes, they'd be willing to do it. They arranged terms. Waterloo's solicitor had gone through the original contract. He said, this is all well and good, but we'd like to have direct authorization for these banknotes from the Bank of Portugal.
Sir William wrote a letter to the governor of the Bank of Portugal.
He gave the letter to Meringue.
And Meringue wasn't going to do
And Meringue got it to Alves dos Reis, and Alves dos Reis said he would take it to the bank, or to his friends in the bank.
Reis supplied Meringue with a forged letter from the governor of the Bank of Portugal. His signature, as always, copied from a banknote. Meringue duly delivered it to Sir William.
Sir William had an agent in Portugal. He was the bird dog. The bird dog was the guy who sensed or got word that the government was going to need a new issue of banknotes. He was very suspicious from the start. Angola banknotes were distributed through a regional bank, which wasn't the Bank of Portugal. It was another bank.
8th of December 1924. Bank Altamarina is a bank dealing with Portuguese colonies. The Bank of Portugal would never consent to their plates being utilised for a Portuguese colony whose finances apparently appear to be in a state of absolute chaos. I cannot but view the whole matter with very grave doubts as to how it will all come out.
Your telegram shows you do not appreciate position. Do nothing. Say nothing.
They disregarded it. The one thing that could have put it taken it off the rails was a note that Sir William thought he should do. And he sent a little note to the governor of the Bank of Portugal telling him that he was acquiescing in this and they'd be glad to cooperate with the bank on this special private issue. Dictated to a secretary who typed it up, put in an envelope, stamped in their local mail room, and then vanished. The one letter that could have thrown this whole thing out, killed it, was never delivered. It was as if the gods in Olympus was protecting Reis all through it. They wanted Reis to succeed, just to have some fun themselves, and keep this plot going.
The presses rolled, using the original Vasco da Gama plates, inked with genuine ink on beautiful, proper, real paper. Even the numbers were correct, supplied by the ever-helpful Sir William Waterlow. They were the same numbers as previous notes. The duplication didn't matter, because these notes were going to be overstamped with the word Angola in that bright blue ink. Sir William had no doubt of this. He'd been told so by another gentleman, just like himself, Meringue.
One winter day, Meringue came to London to pick up the first batch of banknotes, which was worth, I think, $1 million or $2 million. The chief clerk of the firm helped him get a proper leather satchel to hold them.
It was a simple matter to smuggle the satchels into Portugal as diplomatic bags, carried by the Persian consul general, our friend Meringue. There was so much cash, there was no need for any unseemly squabbling between Reis and his business partners. To Oporto, in the north of Portugal, a vast swarm of hired drones descended on the disreputable money changers. They transmuted the notes into reputable currency. There was a charge. There usually is when you visit the laundry. Then came the fun bit.
Reis bought this elaborate mansion in Lisbon, new car and chauffeur. Wife had jewelry and fancy frocks.
So what's this document?
The fashion maker. This is a receipt from Jenny, Madame Jenny, one of the top dressmakers, the stylists of that time. She bought 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 coats with the furs, very expensive ones. This would be 1,970 pounds.
And this is at a time when somebody is working for maybe £1 a week. Being rich wasn't enough. Reis wanted a seat at top table. And another thing was bothering him. The money exchanges. They were messy and eating into the pure profits.
Reis's towering imagination came in. He said, we can't go on doing this. It's crazy. What we need is our own bank.
The Angola and Metropole Bank. The money could now pour in directly. a somewhat unusual bank because it was full of cash, and yet there were no depositors. But that didn't matter because it seemed like a bank. It's like the beginning of a game of Monopoly when one player is elected to be banker. You don't ask where the money came from. Where are the thousands of little old ladies and grown men who've actually deposited that money? It doesn't matter where the money comes from.
Then Meringue went over for a second shipment of banknotes. In all the shipments was the equivalent, in today's terms, $250 million.
Reis now had the funds to begin his most ambitious project, to take over the Bank of Portugal itself. This was a simple matter of buying up the shares of the bank from the private investors, which he did, leading to a rise in the price of shares, which he could easily match with his $250 million. By owning the Bank of Portugal, he would be rendered immune from possible future criminal convictions and would be able to meet Sir William as the real thing. For Alves Reis would be the governor of the Bank of Portugal.
And eventually, of course, fate had to take a role, fate and mathematics. One day, in another bank in Oporto, the cashier of the bank, going through his 500 escudo notes, by sheer chance, alighted on two notes that had the identical serial number. And that was the beginning of the end.
Reis was travelling with his wife back to Portugal by ship from an agreeable assignation with his black lover, Angola. He could have got away. He chose to fight it out. Meringue and Hennies were abroad and chose to remain that way. Reis was imprisoned and put on trial. He could expect between 3 and 5 years in jail, depending on the jury. Unfortunately for Reis, there'd been an abrupt change in government. Even more unfortunately, the military had taken over and brought in a few of those retroactive laws. And the jury wouldn't be 12 ordinary men and women, but 12 frightened judges. He got 20 years. A couple of years passed, then the dictator, Dr. Antonio Salazar, took over. Reis's only hope would be the early death of Salazar. The doctor went on to be one of the longest ruling dictators in the 20th century, hanging on until 1968. It was all very depressing. Meanwhile, Sir William had his own difficulties in London. The Bank of Portugal was suing for damages. He must now give a dazzling performance under cross-examination by Stuart Bevan, QC.
Bank of Portugal's attorney said, "You knew the responsibility which attached to your business." And Waterloo said, "A certain amount."
But after all, we were only printers. We were only ordinary commercial men.
Laughter. "You are putting it a great deal lower than I was prepared to put it. You appreciated that if through any mischance unauthorized notes did, through your presses, get on to the world, the consequences would be most serious." Waterloo said,
Yes, but who would have thought of such a thing as this? And who would have thought that the Bank of Portugal did not keep a register of 500 escudos notes? I dare say if the same thing happened again, without the experience of this matter, I should do exactly the same again.
At the summing up, the judge said, "A printer of banknotes cannot say he was merely a commercial printer." Waterloo's lost. The damage and costs were enormous. Sir William the Pompous had sunk the family firm forever. Meanwhile, Reis was having a strange influence in Portugal.
"This new money, however questionable its origins, helped Portugal recover from a fairly severe recession. It's classic economics, Keynesianism, no question about it. They should have erected a statue to him instead of putting him in prison."
Reis was rotting in jail. His ever-fertile imagination took on an entirely new and unexpected turn.
My life ran among the labyrinths of passion and chimera. My vanity made me think that I would be able to find something to prove that the Bible was the biggest fraud of all time. I could not have imagined that on the black horizon of my criminal life a light had begun to shine. The blessed light.
In a typical display of Reis contrariness, he became a Protestant religious fanatic, further alienating himself from the Catholic dictator. Reich had created such distortions in political and financial life. It was chaos theory in action. He had directly assisted the rise of another economist, Salazar, who promised and delivered stability. It was Portugal that paid the price for his crime. And yet, Reich is not forgotten.
We have a very good image of him in Portugal. People like him. If you speak with anyone, even today, he was really a genius. If I look back in Portuguese history, was one of the most creative person.
Portugal paid part of the price for Reich's crime.
Well, I won't say so much because I like him very much and I don't want to put that burden on him. But his actions contributed to the dictatorship, to the rising of the dictatorship. It's a pity.
I'd interviewed his son. I'm trying to remember what he did for a living. It was a minor occupation. As he put it to me, my father went to jail only because he worked too hard, which is marvelous. Too hard.
Waterloo's reputation as a discreet banknote printer was finished. The firm limped on until the 60s, when it was acquired by De La Rue, who, by one of those strange twists of fate, now print euros for, guess who? Portugal. It seems a pity to have a sad ending, so let's end on a happy note, with an extract of a fantastical novel written at the time, which illustrates how things could have been, or perhaps should have been.
The head of the Bank of Portugal, Comancho Rodrigues, rushes over to Alves dos Reis and asks, "What the hell are you doing?" "I'm saving the country, that's what." They call him vile names. Reis pulls a gun and tells him to shut up. "My notes are worth more than yours." Dazzled by all this, the Prime Minister resigns and offers his post to the great banker. The entire bureaucracy is extinguished immediately. Soon the state is marching in giant steps towards anarchy in its most beautiful and ideal form.